We are live on OK Clarity. I'm Gila Glassberg, registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. And tonight our topic is self-care and eating. So the way that I've been liking to do these lives is that I'm going to read the questions that came in. And I hope that the information that I teach tonight is really just going to answer those questions. So the questions that came in: how can you eat optimally when being a camp counselor for kids and being on the move a whole day? And so much self-care centers around food. Is this okay or not? I feel like it leads to more emotional eating than necessary. So great questions. One's like more general, one's more specific. Okay, so you might be thinking, like, what does self-care have to do with our eating? And I've been counseling people privately now for 5 years, and I really see such a strong correlation. I used to teach this, but now it's so clear to me how much our self-care can overlap with our eating. It depends on the person, but if food has been something that you've used to cope, whether it was binging, overeating, or restricting, then it makes sense that self-care it makes sense that food might become your self-care. So that's really the overlap of our eating with our self-care. So when you are not practicing adequate self-care, food can become your self-care. Okay? That's like the premise of this whole talk. It's also important to know that there are more than one category of self-care. So you could categorize it however you like. I like to categorize it as physical self-care and then emotional/spiritual self-care, right? So you might be thinking, like, I don't know why I'm using food to cope, because I'm doing really well with my physical self-care. Let's say some ideas of physical self-care is like eating enough, eating frequently enough, eating foods that you like enough, which we talked about with honor your hunger, respect your fullness, and the satisfaction of food. It might be that you're sleeping enough. It might be that you're moving enough. Those are all categories of physical self-care. So why am I still binging at night if I'm taking care of myself so well physically? Well, there's another whole category of self-care, which is emotional/spiritual, right? So emotional self-care could be so many different things. Do you have a way to process your emotions? So it doesn't have to be with a therapist, although I'm a big fan of therapy, but it could be with a good friend. It could be with, you could have a support group. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It could be friends that you sit around and read a certain book together. How are your relationships? Are your relationships out of whack? Do you find that you don't have adequate boundaries? And I know that sounds funny, but I feel like when I recount clients' days with them, and they're binging, it has to do with something that happened throughout their day that they didn't have time to process. And they don't have any time to process because they don't have a set time to process emotions. That when it's 9 o'clock at night and it's finally quiet, that's when those emotions start to bubble, and they just don't have tools to deal with it. And the only thing that takes it away momentarily is food. Again, it could be restricting, overeating, or binging. And spiritual practices, we know as Jews that we have a lot of spiritual practices, whether it's davening or saying brachos or any ways that we connect to Hashem. Different people have different ways to connect to Hashem, whether it's just talking to Him or whether it's any type of mitzvah that you do, whether it's like shaking the lulav, right? That could also be spiritual. Being really careful with Shabbos, making Shabbos really holy. Like, there are ways to fill yourself up self-care wise spiritually. So that's the first thing that I would do, is to really take an inventory of how you're doing with your physical, emotional, and spiritual self-care. And just for an example, today I had this with a friend that we were together. We went to a shiur actually, and she's like, I have this problem that whenever I see food, I just eat it. And she's like, it's not a weight loss problem. I'm not looking to lose weight. I just don't like this habit. So I kind of could have guessed that she said this, but she's like, the time that it usually happens is at 9 o'clock at night when everybody's sleeping. So the first thing I asked her, like proactively, before all that, that happens, is how is your self-care? Like in general, right? So everybody has a different need for self-care, and I'll explain more in depth. But just to do like a quick inventory, like, do I eat enough throughout the day? Like we talked about, during Honor Your Hunger, most people feel hungry every 2 to 3 hours. So on a physical level, if you're binging at 9 p.m., it might just be that you're not eating enough. Or maybe it's you're stuck in diet culture and you're not technically dieting, but you're only eating low-calorie food or low-carb food. So by the time 9 o'clock rolls around, you're like, oh my God, like I need something that tastes good, That makes total sense. Or a lot of times we use food when we're just really, really tired. Like we get into like a really bad cycle with sleeping. We go to sleep at 2, we wake up at 6. We could technically function, but we're just not feeling our best. So that's also like a great thing to think about. Like, did I just not sleep enough last night? That's why I'm feeling down. Most people need to move in order to feel good. Whether it doesn't have to be intense exercise, it could be taking a walk, it could just be like going up and down the steps. And that's also good for spiritual self-care, because like for emotional self-care, like if you're feeling like really, really anxious and just like you don't know how to calm down, sometimes like doing jumping jacks or getting on the floor and doing push-ups or dancing, like just moving those emotions through your body. So I hope that makes sense. You feel free to ask me any questions. So one of the ways that I like to teach people about how to practice good self-care is to think about their love language. So you might not be familiar, but Gary Chapman wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages. And he wrote this book basically because he was doing regular counseling, marriage counseling, and he found that there was this gap that somebody would complain like, my wife doesn't love me because she never hugs me, or my husband doesn't love me because he never takes out the garbage, right? And he just saw all those things. She never buys me a gift. He's never there for me. He never wants to talk. He never makes eye contact with me. He's always on his phone, right? So after really analyzing his data, he realized that there are different ways to feel love, and he categorizes them into the 5 love languages. So I did learn this from Carol Abramowitz, who I quote a lot, and her trick is that you want to learn what your love language is and learn to give it to yourself. So it sounds really funny, but for me, I found that was like life-changing. In short, I'm the 4th of 9, and my love language is quality time. So when I realized that I was being like very needy for other people's quality, for people to give me quality time, and like that never really works. Like people don't want to hang out with somebody who's needy. So I realized like just how to create quality time in my life that was with people or even myself, that it was fun and people wanted to do that. So whether it was like my husband wasn't available, going out with a friend, or maybe it's just sitting and journaling and being with my own thoughts. There's also different dialects of the love language. Is it quality time? Is it quality conversation? So some people could be like playing mini golf together and not talking at all, which I can't even fathom how that could be fun. And they're just like, this is so fun. I'm with the person that I love and we're hanging out and it's filling my love tank. And the other person's like, it's not quality time if we're not sitting on the couch making eye contact and having a conversation. So if that is your love language, you could do all those things that I just said, that you could make sure that you have friends who like to go out and hang out with them, or even speaking to them on the phone. I tell this to people all the time. It doesn't have to be an expensive self-care thing. Making a phone call to a friend. How many women have I counseled that said, I don't have any friends. I don't speak to my friends anymore. Now that I'm married with kids, I don't really speak to people. And maybe I was probably there a few years ago, but now it's like hard for me to even wrap my head around, because like everybody needs friends, whether it's women or men, but specifically women need to foster their relationships with their friends, and they need other females in their lives, and they need to be people to speak with. So that's like really, really important for self-care. There's acts of service. So that's like thinking about if somebody can't do acts of service for you. So it could be asking somebody to do it, like straight up. It could be hiring somebody to do it. It could be buying yourself a takeout meal. It could be that you hire more help if you can, or just you have to sometimes get creative in how you could sort of like give it to yourself. But even if it's like, I'm doing this acts of service for myself, can be really powerful. I know that sounds funny, but once you get over like doing it for yourself and not being in a victim role and wondering why nobody's doing it for you, it makes a really big difference. There's words of affirmation. So that's like, I find an easier one. So sometimes I'll help clients come up with 3 affirmations per day, or we build on it, but it has to be like a lot of words that you're saying to yourself, that you're affirming yourself. And you could even Google words of affirmation list and just use the ones that resonate with you. Sometimes I tell clients to like look in the mirror in the morning and say the words of affirmation, or I tell them before bed, try to find a time in your day that's practical for you to actually focus on affirmations. There's physical touch. So how do you give yourself physical touch? So think about things that you're getting like a touch stimulation. So even if you're getting a massage, getting your nails done, something that would engage you physically, like intense exercise, swimming, walking fast, those are all ways to give yourself physical touch. And the last one is gifts. So of course you could buy yourself gifts. And I think that's really cute, because it doesn't have to be expensive gifts, and it doesn't have to lead to like impulse buying, but it could be like a $3 gift once a week or once a month, or you just like save up for something that you really like. So those are the 5 love languages. And if you want to think about this for a second, first of all, you could take the 5 love language quiz online, but you could also think about how you tend to give love. So are you the type of person that when somebody has a baby, you're automatically making them a meal? Or you're the type of person that wants to sit and talk to somebody for a long time and hear how their day went? Are you the type of person that's very touchy? Like, are you like when you see your friends, you're hugging them, or you just engage with people like that? Like, I'm definitely not like that. And like when I was in seminary and people would like hug, I was like, could you not? But everybody's different. And you might think that your love language is one thing because it's like, oh, that's so typical, let's say for a man to be more into physical touch, but it's not necessarily true. So it's really important to understand that. And you could also think about things that you complain about a lot. So I know I'm also not. Things that you complain about a lot. So like, he never takes out the garbage, or like, why does nobody help me in the kitchen, or oh, it's so annoying that nobody gets that I just need a hug right now. Like, it's a funny way to think about it, but it's once you start to get the hang of it, I feel like it gets much easier. And I'll just give you another tool on this topic of the 5 love languages. So my therapist actually taught me this, and I thought it was so good. So we were talking about, this was after my mother died a few years ago, and I said that like some days are just really hard, like I can't, I'm just so down, and some days are better. So I said at that time like things were doing better. So she asked me to like rate my triggers, let's say from 0 to 10. So 0 is like not triggered at all, or 0 is like highly triggered, like totally can't function, and 10 is really happy, like you're doing great. So she said, think about a time in the last few days or weeks that you were at like a higher number, like 7, 8, 9, 10. So I thought about it, and I realized that it was that week that I went out with my friend on Friday, which I haven't done in a while, but for a while I had a steady Friday date with my friend. We would go to a falafel place. If you live in the 5 towns, Geffen is really, really good. And it was like $8. We had 1 hour. And I feel like that filled me up for the whole week. I just had somebody who I enjoy spending time with, and it was fun, and it was out of my house because I work from home also. So that really made a huge difference. And that's like a really good tool to think about. If like, let's say you're trying to figure out what would specifically help you with your self-care, you might want to rate like your from 0 to 10 how like you're doing in terms of like upset or how empty you're feeling, and then you try to do one of those things. Like you call a friend, or you take a walk around the block, or you or you ask somebody to help you take out the garbage, or you hire somebody for extra cleaning help. Then I want you to rate from 0 to 10 how it went. So let's say you were feeling like a 3, like really down, and then a few hours later you were a 6 or a 7 or an 8. Like that's really good information for you to know going forward that this is something that's really, really going to help you. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is that what I was saying before about emotional self-care, it has to do with it's okay. How do I explain this? Okay, I want you to think about this. I'm not a therapist, but I just want you to think about this for a second, because I help people a lot with their relationship with food, and of course, emotional issues come up. So for many people, they were never taught how to feel their feelings, right? So we would go to our parents and say like, oh, we had such a bad day. And they were like, oh, it couldn't have been so bad. Or don't worry, tomorrow will be better, right? There's like a lot of dismissiveness, at least maybe my generation, and to nobody's fault. Like, I don't think we had those tools to just like be like, wow, that must have been so hard. And not to stay stuck in that negative feeling, but to have space for the negative feeling. Because usually when we do have the tools to engage with the feeling directly, then there's so many tools that you could use. The feeling does dissipate, or you learn how to move through the feeling, and you feel better afterwards, as opposed to it's 8 o'clock at night, you are so triggered, nobody listened. Well, let's take it a few steps back. You have no self-care that week or that month or that year. You never did anything for yourself in the last year. You thought that was like the best way to be a mother, just like totally negate yourself, right? And you had you're feeling bad anyways, right? You're feeling horrible anyways. You're probably disconnected with yourself anyways if you're not doing anything for yourself. And you had a particularly hard day at work. Then you felt horrible. And then you had a particularly hard night with your kids, and it's 8 o'clock, and you are just like at a 0 trigger or 10 trigger, however you want to think about it. And you're like, I'm so done, and I'm in so much pain, and I don't even have a way to deal with it. And your natural tendency is to just go straight into the kitchen. And before you know it, you've eaten multiple things, and you're not even feeling anything anymore because you're so numb, right? So there's so many layers there. Number one, if you've dieted a lot, so you were in, let's say you're in the restrict binge cycle. So once you start dieting, food becomes much more rewarding, right? And food is always available for most people. And I would say it's like the most acceptable coping strategy, right? As opposed to like alcohol or drugs or gambling, right? So you have food in your house. It's more acceptable. Food has become much more rewarding because you've been dieting, and now your self-care tank is totally low, right? So it kind of just to validate the experience that it makes sense, and it's maybe just the habit that when you feel bad, you go straight to the kitchen. That could even just be like a goal for you to think like, oh, my natural pattern of the day is to like do this, and then go right to the kitchen. Probably mostly you're going to use food to cope, right? So I know this is only a 30-minute live, but if you want to just think about it for a minute, I think that this is a really powerful tool. I'll give you a few tools when it comes to dealing with the feeling directly. So obviously there's different modalities of therapy also, which is helpful. And I'm sure if any of you are in therapy, you learn those skills, which is amazing. So one thing that you could do, if you've been practicing some of the principles we spoke about, and you're able to identify, am I physically hungry, right? Because we've talked about honor your hunger, respect your fullness, and the satisfaction of food. Sorry. Then now it's much easier to see, am I eating because I'm physically hungry, or am I eating because I'm emotionally hungry, right? So let's say you're really good at identifying your hunger fullness. You practice it. You set alarms every 2 to 3 hours. You wrote down your hunger fullness patterns, and you know that you just ate dinner an hour ago and you were a 9. So it's an hour later. Again, everything's calm in your house. You're not feeling great emotionally or physically or anything. And you okay, so you already know that your hunger, fullness, and satisfaction. So you get a feeling, right? An emotion comes up for you. Something's bubbling up from the day that you didn't have time to process, or you didn't want to process. You're like, oh, I can't believe I screamed at that kid again. Or like, I can't believe she said that to me at work. Like, that was such a rude thing to say. Again, like, we don't always have time and space to process what happens in our day. So usually we have like moments as the day goes on that our feelings kind of start to bubble up, which is totally normal. And it's a healthy thing to process your emotions, as I'm sure most of you know. So you want to set a timer for 1 to 2 minutes. I used to say 5 minutes, but now I say 1 or 2 minutes. You set a timer for 1 or 2 minutes, and you just sit with your emotion. And you know that you want to eat because of an emotional reason now, because you're not physically hungry and you are trying to eat foods that you enjoy. So you sit, and you could ask yourself, you could either just sit and be like, whoa, I'm feeling really anxious. I'm feeling really upset. I'm feeling really frustrated, and just like sit there in it. And it sounds so simple, but like, I don't know, raise your hand if you've ever done that. Or raise your hand if you've ever been taught to do that, because I was never taught to do that. That it's like okay to just feel a feeling, and you could even notice it in your body. I feel that tension in my stomach. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my throat, in my cheeks, right? Just noticing that feeling. Some people need a little bit more prompting, so you could ask yourself, what am I feeling right now, and what do I need? And that's also really powerful. Again, for some people, they might just need to sit and feel the feeling for however long. They might want to journal about it. That's like dealing with the feeling directly. They might want to call a friend, but try this a few times. I wouldn't say, if you're like really struggling with like using food to cope, I would say only try this like once or twice in the next week, and see if if it helps. See if like, oh wow, I was feeling like super, super anxious and now like I'm 2 levels lower. And then hopefully that will reinforce you to continue to try that. You could also try to, if you're trying to figure out your love language, you could try to give yourself your love language or plan to do that at a different time instead of eating. And that's like really, really helpful, because what I came on to start with is that what does self-care have to do with eating? And it has so much to do with eating. If your pattern is to use food to cope and you don't have any other coping strategies, it makes so much sense. So the questions that were asked: how can you eat optimally when being a camp counselor for kids and being on the move a whole day? So like oftentimes with clients, I come up with a self-care plan when they're in this type of thing where it's really, really hard to eat in a balanced way, in a way that they like. So for this would be like more specific question, but like, can you do smoothies? Can you do yogurt? Can you do rice cakes and cheese? Can you do things that's just like a practical food thing? Can you eat bigger breakfasts or bigger dinners and make sure that they're planned? Like planning is key. Meal planning is a part of self-care. I do meal planning with clients when I feel like they're able to use food from a place of self-care and not punishment. So I'm not like putting them on a diet. I'm just trying to help them automate their eating. So for many people, they have no connection with what they want to eat and how much they want to eat because of all those years of dieting, right? So again, I'm just like reinstating those hunger fullness cues, and I want them to honor them. And if you don't plan for it, then it's very easy for you to go 8 hours without eating. So you need to like sit down on a Sunday or the night before, whatever works for you. And don't be hard on yourself, because I feel like that's something that I've learned on this journey as well, that like some people will be like, I know what you have to do. Every Sunday you have to meal plan. That's the only way this is going to work. And that's really not true. For some people, they set alarms on their phone for 7 p.m. and they make the menu for the next day. For some people, it's a month menu. For some people, they start making menus and they keep them and they rotate them. There are ways, even if you're not naturally an organized person and you don't really want to be involved with your meal planning, there are easier ways to go about it. And then the next question: so much self-care centers around food. Is this okay or not? I feel like it leads to more emotional eating than necessary, right? So I always say this, I'll talk about it in the more like emotional eating principles, but I always say that it's okay if emotional eating, it happens sometimes, because that could be a tool in your toolkit, right? So for example, you wanted to go out with your sister for dinner and you were really looking forward to it, and she cancels. And you're like, okay, that's a little bit annoying, but you're feeling like, I really wanted to go out with her, right? So you might be like, let me just have a piece of chocolate. And that might actually bring in your mood, right? That's a tool that you use to lift your spirits. But let's say, God forbid, you get into like this huge fight with your mother and she storms out of the room and you storm out of the room and you don't speak for a week. And like, this is someone who you speak to every day or you have a really close connection with, and you're like hating on each other, right? Food is not going to help you. That's obvious. So if you have to match the trigger with the thing that actually helps. In a huge fight with your parent or your spouse or your best friend or a death in the family, God forbid, yeah, it could help you in the moment, but it's not going to, you know that food's actually not going to help you. So this is where you learn that like you have like 20 tools in your toolkit and emotional eating is one of them. I could use food once in a while. If it's your only tool, that's really bad for a bunch of reasons. Number one, it's bad because you're not actually dealing with the emotion. So you're getting this trigger, which is causing you to eat, but you're actually just totally neglecting that emotional health that will come back to bite you. Because when you don't deal with your emotions, although many of us got really good at sweeping them under the rug, they will come back in many shapes and forms. They might come back in back pain. They might come back in panic attacks. They might come back in all sorts of things, even emotional eating. I tell this to people all the time. If you could change your lens a little bit about emotional eating and think of it as a gift, that every single time I start wanting to go to the kitchen and binge, think to yourself, now I know something is off in my life. Something has shifted and I must deal with that now. So like, this is something that you would want to start identifying. Every single time I scream at my kid, it is so painful for me, because when my mother screamed at me, this is not my example, but when my mother screamed at me, I felt like so little, and I felt like I wanted to climb under the table, that when I do that, I can't even handle that pain. So I need to eat like 4 cupcakes, right? That's something that you got in the habit of doing. You'll also notice that it's much easier to feel guilty about eating 4 cupcakes than it is feeling guilty that you screamed at your kid. Those are 2 different levels of pain, right? So you just have to remember that these are patterns that we learned with food, that we use food to cope when we're feeling down, that we transfer our pain from our guilt to our food, from other things in life that are more important, or we even just eat so quickly because we're still so stuck in the diet mentality that we're like, okay, I don't want to feel this guilt, right? Like if I go into the kitchen and I see chocolate and I really want to eat it and it smells so good and I'm feeling so down and I'm thinking, oh my God, I had a session with Gila today and I'm like strong and I got this, I'm not going to eat the chocolate. And then all of a sudden you start eating it, and you realize that like an hour ago you were like screaming at your spouse. You're like, oh my God, I'm such a loser. Like I can't believe I just ate this chocolate. As opposed to like, wow, it really is frustrating to fight with somebody that you love, and it really hurts. Like I'm feeling really down about myself and I'm feeling really stuck, right? So number 1, you're feeling the feeling, which is amazing and super powerful. And number 2, now you could get help, right? So I want you to think about emotional eating as a gift, if you can, because you will learn when you start to use food as your self-care. And when you do learn those patterns, now you know what's going on in your life that's off, that's a little bit off, or a little bit not as great as you want it to be. And now you know that whenever you get this urge to emotionally eat, there's something in your life that you need to deal with, right? So the self-care topic having to do with food is both, I want you to think of it as like preventative and also in the moment. So like first things first, I want you to come up with a self-care plan. So again, it doesn't have to be expensive and it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but it should involve, I would say, like at least one thing a day, and for sure multiple things a week. So like if your thing is quality time, going out with a friend, you don't have to pay money. You could walk in the park. If you really need physical touch, you could get into like really intense exercise, or swimming or running or getting a massage, like I said before, or getting a manicure. I know that sounds funny, but you know how important it is for humans to have touch. It's such an interesting thing that we don't think about. I took a parenting class and with Sima Spetner, and she said that when you're with your children, every hour that you're with your child, so like not the hours that they're in school, but let's say that they're home with you, you need to touch them at least 2 to 3 times an hour. And it doesn't have to be a hug. It could just be like a pat on the back or touching their hand when you're giving something to them, because it's so important to feel the need of touch. And we don't think about that. I don't think a lot of us know that. And then the self-care piece is also really, really important in the moment. So when you get a trigger and your automatic usual tool is to go into the kitchen and eat, number 1, change your pattern. So don't go into the kitchen. I've also learned this recently, to change your transitional. So your transitional step. So if your usual step is like walk out of the bedroom, my kid's bedroom, into the kitchen. So like you could even like sit down outside the room and like play Sudoku, just like break that pattern so that you're not going from one thing to the next that you're used to going to. And having a list of things that help you when you are getting that trigger to emotionally eat. So just take it step by step. I think number 1 is like just having space to feel. Identifying the feeling. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? What do I need? Some people, they have tools, whether it's from their therapist, DBT therapist, like how to regulate their nervous system. I just recently learned to something that you could do. Just a tip that I just learned is that you could put like freezing cold things on your face, and that helps you regulate your nervous system. So I know that it's like much easier to go to the kitchen and eat. And I know that like it might be a pattern that you're used to, and I know that having a self-care plan can be really hard, but it's actually going to help you so much. And you don't have to change your life overnight. I just want you to think about things that you actually enjoy, that make you feel good, that make you happy, that make you feel good about yourself. And before you get into the situation of using food to cope, and then while you're in it, like being proactive, like what list do I have that I can't access right now because I'm so triggered, that I actually really, really enjoy doing and that I could use right now. Okay, so our time is up. Feel free to ask me any questions here. Okay, so just so you guys know, I have a podcast called Get Into It with Gila, which I actually talk about self-care and food a lot. And I actually have on my website, gilaglassberg.com, if you put in your email address, you could get a self-care talk and a self-care download, because this is like something I'm super passionate about. And I know it sounds like la 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 self-care, we're also into self-care, and I know that sounds like it almost sounds like boring at this point, but I feel like this is like the real self-care, not like the bubble baths and manicures, although those are great. This is like really how you care for your child is how you need to care for yourself. And I know, again, that's not something that we're used to. Like, I think our generation was like the mothers negated and the kids we're taking care of the kids, but I think we all know that how kids learn the most is by modeling. So if they see a neglected mother, they learn, when I'm a mother, I'm going to neglect myself. And what do we ultimately want? We want our kids to learn to take care of themselves. So we have to be our own parent, and we have to take care of ourselves. And if you're struggling with emotional eating, I think this will be a really powerful tool. Okay, have a good night, guys. Bye.